Welcome back to another episode of Doodling Through Education. For my CC students, this is Cycle 1, Week 17, History. And that just means we are going to narrow in and talk a little bit more about the Aztec civilization today. Before we get started, make sure to head on over to doodlingthrougheducation.com. There's a link in the description. I've made workbooks that go along with each of these videos, and I've also separated them by quarter if it makes it easier for you to purchase them that way. Without further ado, let's start doodling. Last week we talked about the Mayans, the Olmecs, and the Aztecs. And today we're going to swing back around and talk about the Aztecs in a little more depth. When we talked about them last week, we talked about how they compared to the Olmecs and Mayans, and today we're going to talk more about their culture and history as a separate civilization. Life for the typical person living in the Aztec Empire was pretty hard work. We see this across history with many ancient societies that the rich were able to live lives of luxury, where the typical people had to work very hard to maintain what they had. In the 1400s through the early 1500s, the Aztec people controlled a large amount of area that is now central and southern Mexico. They controlled almost 80,000 square miles. So this Aztec Empire is known as one of the great ancient empires. The last great Aztec emperor was named Montezuma II, and he ruled over about 6 million people. As far as Aztec history goes, it is believed that they moved into this area in central southern Mexico from the north around the year 1200. The capital city of the Aztec Empire was Tenochtitlan, and it was built on islands located in Texcoco. This lake was later drained and today is part of Mexico City. Tenochtitlan was a very powerful and wealthy city. It had white palaces and temples that were located on top of beautiful large pyramids. The city officials would live in houses made from stone and a sun-dried clay called adobe, where farmers would live in huts that were made from twigs and also covered with clay. The Aztecs were great farmers. They grew things like corn, beans, peppers, squash, tomatoes, tobacco, and cotton. In this civilization, other Aztecs could be traders or craftsmen. The Aztec people spoke a language called Nahua, and these ancient words were later incorporated into what makes up the Spanish language. The Aztecs had no alphabet per se, but they used a type of picture writing similar to Egyptian hieroglyphics to record their history. As far as religion goes, it was a very important part of the Aztec culture. They worshipped many different gods, but typically would worship gods that they contributed with ruling the aspects of nature. Some of these gods included a sun god, a god of war, a god of rain, and a god of learning and of death and rebirth. To worship these gods, the Aztecs would perform these elaborate rituals and ceremonies, and they believed this would bring favor upon themselves, and in turn the gods would help them. And during these rituals, they sadly would sacrifice humans. They believed that because life was the most precious possession, if they sacrificed life, then this would be the most acceptable gift for their gods. The people that they typically sacrificed included prisoners that were captured during their battles. Another thing that the Aztecs are known for is their ability to have kept a solar calendar, and it is thought that they learned this from the Mayans. Now, this great empire was at the height of their power when a man named Hernan Cortes and his Spanish soldiers arrived. Hernan Cortes was a Spanish conquistador, and he landed on the Mexican coast in 1519. When this happened, Montezuma II, the ruler of the Aztec Empire, sent Cortes gifts of gold and chocolate to welcome them. Montezuma II did not fully trust Cortes, though, but he also believed that it was possible that Cortes was an Aztec god. They believed that some of their gods would come to Earth as a man, and Cortes had arrived on one of their gods' birthdays, and so it was natural that Montezuma II believed that Cortes could have possibly been a god. Cortes originally arrived with about 500 men and founded a small settlement that would eventually become the city of Veracruz. He spent a lot of his time getting to know the people who lived in this area, and even had a woman who would travel with him and worked as his interpreter. As he got to know many of the native people in this area, he was able to build some alliances, which included with the local tribes of the Teutonic and the Tlaxcalans. With these alliances, he was able to march on the city of Tenochtitlan, and as he did this, he conquered many of the cities along the way, as well as making alliances with others. Most of these surrounding cities around Tenochtitlan did not like the Aztecs because the Aztecs were the ones who had raided their cities and would take people to sacrifice to their gods. Montezuma II saw that this was happening, and he really made an attempt at keeping Cortes from getting all the way to Tenochtitlan, but it was in vain because he was able to finally conquer his way to arrive in Tenochtitlan. Montezuma II was wary of this, but he welcomed Cortes in nevertheless because he thought that it might still be possible that he was a god. And so he welcomed him in and gave him gifts as he brought him inside. During this meeting, tensions mounted and the two sides broke out in a fight. It was at this point that Cortes's men took King Montezuma captive. And unfortunately, during his captivity, at some point, Montezuma II was killed. Although historians aren't sure why or how he was killed, but after he died, the Spanish soldiers tried to flee from Tenochtitlan. They were attacked as they were running, and nearly 2/3 of the Spanish soldiers were killed. Cortes was able to escape with a few men from Tenochtitlan, and it was at this point that he gathered a large force of mainly natives to fight the Aztecs. He returned to Tenochtitlan with his new army, and after 3 months of fighting, he was able to take control of the city, and this completed the full conquest of the Aztec Empire. Some interesting facts about what transpired after he took control of the Aztec Empire are that Cortes was quite worried that his crew would steal his ships and desert him. So in his angst, he sunk his whole fleet. When the Spanish arrived, the Aztecs were susceptible to many of the diseases that they brought over, including smallpox, influenza, and even malaria. And it's estimated that about 80% of the people living in this valley of Mexico died from these diseases. Cortes did eventually found Mexico City on the ruins of Tenochtitlan, and it is the capital of Mexico now and considered one of the largest cities in the world. And that's all we have for today. So this week, make sure you go through those 4 worksheets that I provided for you in the history workbook so that you can further dive into the Aztec Empire. There's some matching questions as well as some fill-in-the-blank questions that I think will be very beneficial to complete your understanding of the Aztec Empire. And on that note, remember to be kind, follow God's will, and take care. Bye.